The Battle of Fredericksburg was forced upon these armies and upon this landscape in December of 1862 because we are on the eve of the Emancipation Proclamation, which will be signed on January 1st, 1863, New Year's Day, just a couple weeks away from this battle. And with that, we are looking at all of this that has happened as a countdown to New Year's, but also to a new war and to a new world, because everything changes as of Fredericksburg. The war has a long way to go before slavery will be destroyed. But only a tiny fraction of the enslaved people that are going to be liberated are going to be liberated by military emancipation. More are going to be freed by government abolition. And most are going to have their human rights secured by the 13th Amendment in 1865. But starting right here at Fredericksburg, regardless of the outcome of this battle, slavery was doomed. Slavery was doomed. Greenlee Davidson and Ned Marie set up on this hillside right behind you. And they literally fought in the ashes of slave cabins to fight on this ground. And they also fought in the very dying embers of slavery itself. It was all coming down, and there was nothing they could do about that. The men of the Fredericksburg Artillery went on to fight in 24 battles, great and small, during the war. And they paid for it. There were 15 men that were killed fighting with the Fredericksburg Artillery. There were 33 that were wounded at least once during the war while serving in this unit. And many of them were hurt or injured multiple times. And there were 13 who lost their lives to disease, which makes them, again, a very interesting unit. Because most units in the Civil War lost more men to disease than to bullets. But the Fredericksburg Artillery lost more men to combat than they did to illness. Some of these soldiers came home after the war. 18 of them became farmers. 12 of them became teachers. 12 of them became merchants. 4 of them became politicians. 3 preachers. 2 bankers. And others became lawyers and millers. Some moved elsewhere and started new homes and new lives away from Fredericksburg. They moved to Baltimore and Washington and Philadelphia and Memphis, Chicago. They moved to states like Missouri, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, New York, Arkansas, Mississippi, Kentucky, Montana, Iowa, and even Texas. For all of them, the war had indelibly altered the home that they carried in their hearts, no matter where they went. One of the members of this battery was a man named John Musco Garrett. He served in the Fredericksburg Artillery and saw the entire scope of the American Civil War. He was a 22-year-old clerk living in Fredericksburg in 1861 and joined up with his roommates. He survived the war, and he witnessed the final act of the drama that played out in his father's barn in Caroline County, where John Wilkes Booth was mortally wounded. It is interesting to note that Richard Garnett, the father, is buried in Caroline County, and his gravestone makes no mention of such things. But his son, Musco, is also buried there. And on his gravestone, it lists his name, his dates, and one specific line. Owned the barn that John Wilkes Booth was shot in. And that was his epitaph. This war was very real and very personal, and maybe even more so, because unlike many communities that experienced war for just a brief moment and had to deal with it for decades, the war here is unique as the people themselves. Because the war that came to Fredericksburg stayed and lingered and festered until it became part of the experience of living or dying here. Musco Garrett's brother was also named Richard, and little Richard wrote about this experience of living in this immediate vicinity. He said, some of you Georgians and Kentuckians and Texans, you think you know something about the horrors of war. But we, who lived in the narrow circle formed by Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville and Spotsylvania and the wilderness, we know. We, who for many a night, for months and years, could hear the booming of cannon as we went to sleep, and the rattle of musketry as we awoke in the morning. We, who almost every day heard the pitiful moaning of the wounded and saw the harried burial of the dead. We knew that war was a real thing. So the war did change here, because it changed the people who would change the war. And nobody would ever be the same again. Some would be able to take this experience and grow. And some will be able to seize freedom out of this, making sure that the death was not in vain. And some would come back and rebuild either the land or rebuild themselves. But all of it changed inalterably in a white heat moment on a little knoll on the edge of the Mansfield plantation.